Good evening, and thank you for joining me for a public hearing of the Public Service and Transportation Committee. I am Councilmember Shayla D, and I serve as chair. Tonight, I am calling this hearing to order to discuss proposed changes to the city's junk motor vehicle code. The changes we will discuss this evening have been in the works for a while. However, like many things over the past year, the pandemic slowed down some of that progress. In March 2020, the city suspended enforcement of the 72-hour parking rule to provide flexibility for residents working from home and following the COVID-19 stay-at-home order and health and safety guidelines. This greatly impacted residents' complaints of abandoned vehicles on city streets. In March 2021, the city resumed enforcement of the 72-hour parking rule as the city began to open up. Enforcement of removing vehicles has been prioritized by the Division of Police based on residents reporting inoperable, unsafe, or abandoned vehicles parked long-term in their neighborhoods. Unfortunately, resuming enforcement has not gone far enough in addressing some of the vehicles we are seeing on our streets and in our neighborhoods. Tonight, we will hear from the Division of Parking Services and the Columbus Division of Police to better understand some of these issues, as well as propose updates to the city parking code to better address the concerns. With that, I will turn it over to Assistant Director Robert Farron to get us started. Robert, the floor is yours.
Councilmember Favor, thank you very much for the time this evening as we talk about these code changes. I am joined by Amanda Ford in our office in the Division of Parking Services, as well as Commander Alex Baden with the Division of Police. I'll kick it off here. We have a short presentation to walk through the code changes. To start, we're going to just give a brief update as to why these these parking code modernizations are needed. Talk more specifically about abandoned and junk vehicles. We'll go code by code through the code to go into detail about the proposed changes. You'll see that while we're focused on a couple elements of the code, it certainly affects multiple lines. So we'll certainly walk through that, and then we'll entertain questions and comments. So why modernize the code? So in addition to the abandoned and junk vehicle code, there's some other elements of the parking code that we are proposing for change. And a lot of it's about outdated language. Our parking system has really evolved over the past few years. Our team brought a series of code changes to Council for consideration and approval back in 2018 as we launched our Short North Parking Plan and as we looked at modernizing our parking system. And just briefly, Amanda, I think you may be sharing another version of. There we go. Thank you. I know WebEx just updated this week, so we're all figuring that out. So we wanted to make sure that the code allowed us to do things like virtual permitting and allowed us to more actively manage our curb lane. So we have additional small code changes to update our language in the code as technology changes, and to make sure that there is little room for misinterpretation by residents as well as our parking enforcement officers. Also, there are certainly changing conditions. Parking's evolved over the past several years, notwithstanding the pandemic, which we have seen significant changes in how people access the curb lane. But again, the main focus of this effort this evening is about reducing loopholes that impact residential access in neighborhoods around junk motor vehicles. The next slide here shows a couple pictures of what we see around Columbus. And this is not any one neighborhood, this is throughout the city. I will say this is not unique to Columbus. I've worked in a number of cities where abandoned and junk motor vehicles is a bit of a challenge everywhere. It's a challenge due to resources, but also the legislation that allows for enforcement of these violations. So again, we're here tonight to try to close some loopholes. The challenge with this is certainly multifold. There's clearly a public safety challenge when you have vehicles of this nature on public streets. It's a quality of life and property value challenge. And then generally, it's a general access challenge where we tend to have these challenges is also where we have on-street parking pressures. It's in neighborhoods that have inadequate or do not have off-street parking. So by tightening up the code and reducing loopholes and creating a more efficient way to enforce with still very limited resources, we can start to address some of these challenges facing our neighborhoods. A couple stats here to kind of show the order of magnitude. This is going back to 2018. This is data from CPD as well as through 311. 311 complaints you can see have remained fairly steady. Again, as you mentioned, Councilmember Favor, in March of 2020, we suspended multiple parking enforcement codes, including but not limited to 72-hour rule, and therefore you saw a bit of a drop, and certainly a drop in tickets issued and towed vehicles. However, complaints stayed fairly steady. As we'll note, through May of this year, we are on track to surpass our 2018 numbers. If anything, COVID exacerbated the challenges we saw on the street. But you can see where we have complaints, we have tickets issued and towed vehicles. So we do make progress. And again, creating some more efficient parking codes will allow us to more efficiently enforce these violations. As we go to the next slide, I'm going to start going through the very exciting part of this, which is stepping through each code and talking about the changes that we're proposing to make. And what you'll see again is that there are a lot of code changes that we're proposing because the abandoned and junk vehicle enforcement is intertwined through several parts of the parking code. The first one is actually to repeal 210155, abandoned junk motor vehicle. It's not because we're trying to get rid of this code, it's because there's duplication with the other codes we're trying to change. So this definition is too close in nature to the definition of junk motor vehicle as we're proposing to change, and I'll go into that in a second. And that's going to only create confusion, again, from an enforcement standpoint and certainly from a resident standpoint. What we want to do is update 210156, which is the definition of junk motor vehicle. This definition would be applied to the vehicles left on private property, as well as in the public right of way. When it comes to the public right of way, we're not just talking about the street. We're also talking about the easement. We're talking about the travel lane. We're talking about what tends to be some gray areas between where the curb ends and where property lines begin. And by modifying this definition, we can reduce and remove all the ambiguity in where these vehicles are located and how we can enforce them. We're removing the definition in terms of the time allowed these vehicles to be parked at on the street. And we're putting that in the violation sections I'll talk about in a minute, the actual code where we write the ticket, and really making this definition about what is a junk motor vehicle. And one of the big changes we're making is to really describe what we mean by junk motor vehicle and be as specific as possible. So we're replacing language with visible or non-visible damage that includes missing or damaged wheels, tires, glass, vehicle motor, transmission, vehicle body part, or vehicle interior that deems the vehicle inoperable or unsafe to operate. Previous or currently, the code specifies, among other things, a dollar value of the vehicle. That becomes very challenging to enforce. From an operations standpoint, this violation is not written often because it's very inefficient. It's very inefficient to enforce. By removing that element and really making it more about the condition of the vehicle and really about the pictures, certainly pictures we saw earlier, it will create a more efficient, certainly more efficient process. You go to the next slide, Amanda. We are adding, again, easement and public right-of-way to various code sections. What we found, and this has come up COVID but pre-COVID, again, there are a number of streets in our city where it is not clear, when the asphalt ends or the pavement ends, and then where private property begins, there is that gray area. And our code has not really been clear as to can we enforce those violations or not. So because of that, vehicles sit there and they still create unsafe situations and they create property value challenges and general quality of life challenges. So all these code sections, we are adding the ability to enforce the provisions of those codes in both the public street, but also in easements as well as the public right-of-ways. Next slide there. So other feedback and other pain points we've seen through 311 complaints, through code enforcement officers, through neighborhood feedback, is about the type of vehicles we're seeing out there, the type of vehicles that are being abandoned. We're adding, at least we're looking to add the term boat and the term travel trailer to vehicles that cannot be left on public streets. Right-of-ways or easements for more than 1 hour. Currently, the code has a number of types of vehicles that have to be moved within an hour, but boat and travel trailer are not on there. And again, that creates a loophole. And really, it becomes frustrating for residents when we're enforcing one thing, but then some boat is being left on the street. And then in 215121, and some of this is due to state changes regarding failure to register or display. And I will say this is the ticket. We issue more violations for failing to register or display your plate properly in this city than any other violation code. I think people think we write a lot of tickets for meter non-payment. Between police and parking enforcement, we write most for this. So a couple things we would like to change. One is adding a provision for us to enforce this in public parking facilities that are owned and operated by the city. In many cases, look no different than on-street parking. However, we're not currently allowed to enforce these code violations on those lots. By removing the front license plate requirement, and that is lockstep with the state legislature and the change that was made last year as part of the transportation bill. And then adding valid registration sticker. We have challenges with stickers appearing to be valid based on the expiration date, but not being valid because it's not on the right vehicle. And while there are ways to enforce, this would clearly allow us to enforce those violations. And we do see a lot of that, especially in our in-town neighborhoods where we have a lot of parking demand pressures. If you go to the next slide, a couple other code sections related to junk motor vehicles. 215123, we are updating the parking infraction description to match the code. Right now, they're not consistent. In 215124, we're adding a subsection that that leaving a junk vehicle on private property actually means it's a parking infraction. I believe that was just left out of the code. But all of our parking infractions, there's a line at the very end that says this violation constitutes an infraction. So we're just making sure everything's consistent. And then in 2150.10, we're also creating some consistency in the overall fine structure. We want to reduce the fine amount for junk motor vehicles from $89 to $30 to be in line with our violations around the 72-hour rule. Whether it's a junk vehicle on the street or on if it's public property or private property, we want to make sure that fine is consistent. And then updating the code description to remove the term abandoned. Again, abandoned is defined somewhere else, and we want to make sure that we're defining terms in the proper locations in the code. With that, I think the next slide, we're going to talk about parking, the code modernization, and with that, I will hand it off. Actually, sorry, before I hand it off to Amanda Ford, I wanted to give Commander Bain an opportunity to speak about these code changes and their impacts to the division police.
Thank you. Having reviewed these proposed changes, the Division of Police supports these. The modernization and common sense, if you will, of taking out the dollar value, which is incredibly subjective, plus with, frankly, just the cost of things increasing. That was an appropriate thing to do. and addressing the easement right of way is helpful for us as well. The end result is there's a lot of people that have a great deal of concerns about junk motor vehicles, abandoned motor vehicles, and the negative impact they have on our community in the many ways that you've already pointed out. And I believe this will help us to address this in a little bit more timely fashion and make more progress for our citizens.
Thank you, Commander Banion. And just as I pass it off to Amanda, I know the ordinance language is sometimes tough, just in terms of legalese, but generally with these proposed changes, and this is, of course, there's going to be communication out to stakeholders, would be the 72-hour rule will remain intact. And if you have a vehicle that does not fall under junk motor vehicle and is a generally operable vehicle, you'll still have to move your vehicle after 72 hours from the place in which it's parked, at least 75 feet. And that's to maintain turnover and to prevent long-term storage of vehicles. If it's a junk motor vehicle now, with this new definition, if it's on private property, if it's in the public right-of-way, it will also be, it will actually be 48 hours. So you'll have 48 hours to move and remove that vehicle, or it's subject to impoundment, to certainly ticketing and impoundment. On private property, it'll be 72 hours. And that is because while it's certainly a quality of life challenge and certainly a property value challenge, it's not a direct public safety challenge in that it's not in the public right of way. So as it's currently proposed, those are kind of the 2 to 3 different time frames, and that is, they're clear there will be an educational component if certainly if all these changes are approved by council. So with that, I'll pass it off to Amanda Ford to talk about the other parking code modernization.
Before Amanda steps in, just very quickly, Robert, I just want to make sure that residents are clear about what these changes represent. So if the vehicle is a junk vehicle within the definition of being a junk vehicle, it must now be moved within 48 hours, at least 75 feet. Is that correct?
If it's if it's not on private property. So if it's in the public, and Amanda, please correct me if I'm wrong, but public right-of-way easement, it would be 48 hours, which is consistent with the previous code, but we've clarified things a bit. If it's on private property, that would be 72 hours, which is the same as just a generally operable vehicle. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you can have a perfectly well-running vehicle. You still need to move your car after 72 hours, at least 75 feet, to again maintain turnover, maintain access for residents.
And how is that determined on private property? So am I just I'm moving it a slight distance in the driveway, or how would that play out in real time for folks?
I don't know, Commander Banion, if you want to speak to that, or also Amanda. And I'm looking to make just in the detailed code section here to make sure that I'm saying things appropriately. But I'll defer to Amanda and Commander Banion first, and I can kind of come back.
When it's on private property, that's enforced by code enforcement, whereas police do the enforcement when it's out in the public right-of-way, the street, the easement. They have the ability to enforce that, but if it is on private property, that is up to code enforcement. Police don't enforce that on private property.
And are there any changes that need to be made as it relates to code enforcement in order for them to continue to do their job according to what these changes are recommending this evening? Do we need to
I don't believe so.
Okay.
And just to clarify, it's 48 hours, and the 75-foot rule still applies. So we have introduced the 75-foot rule to which probably it means it has to be moved off private property. So it needs to be moved and removed essentially, unless you have a larger property. But that we've defined the movement because in the past, and back in 2018, we actually showed a video of someone chaining a vehicle to another vehicle and moving it a foot. moving the tire mark, and that's why we introduced the 75 feet. That's a general best practice in our industry, actually define movement and define it in a way that if it's inoperable, it needs to be removed and not just moved. So that now is applied to the private property as well as junk motor vehicle on the street.
This question to Commander Boehner. Oftentimes not oftentimes, but there are times when whether it's neighbor dispute or folks are looking to weaponize code enforcement, they will call it and make complaints. And how are we going to be able to? How will officers determine, based upon the changes that are being recommended this evening, that a vehicle owner isn't in the process of making improvements, so repairing the broken windows? I can't remember the complete definition in its entirety, but making improvements to the vehicle. What would be something that could demonstrate that for an officer, to an officer?
While there's not a precisely defined set of procedures, I guess the best way to say it is a lot of discretion and common sense. Oftentimes, while they're dealing with the vehicle initially, they'll be approached by somebody in the neighborhood, whether it be maybe the person that called or the owner, or they will reach out to the owner. Oftentimes, it's apparent somebody is working on the vehicle, and they may, or they're not finished, or they're partially in there through their repair, and they're back and forth. Not everyone has the luxury of taking it to a mechanic or having a garage to work on something in. Oftentimes, they are going to initiate the process of, we've identified the car's junk motor vehicle, it's been there. We're going to let those individuals know and let them know that this process is initiated and they need to move this vehicle along or get their repair done. And if they don't, then they could face an issue. And oftentimes, frankly, it's just working with people, communication, discretion, and just recognizing that life isn't perfect for everyone. Our citizens have been struggling for quite a while. Many times they're, with the income, sickness, or whatever it might be. And so we need to recognize that as well in our enforcement efforts.
Commander, if a person if they are looking to communicate to the officer these changes, best recommendation for those folks, just based off of your last response, is just to if you've got receipts or what have you, make sure those things are available so that you can demonstrate that those repairs are being needed. And I bring this up because we have actually been working through a similar issue in my office with a person who had their vehicle towed. And so for folks who are wondering, best practice could potentially be to have, receipts and things like that demonstrate that you're actively working on the repairs. But is the process to receive a parking infraction first, or is it immediately a tow?
There we go. Hit the right button. I had to unmute myself. The process, with my understanding, and in reading through here, I don't know if this will change any of it, but the process is to go out there and identify these vehicles, which of course come from oftentimes our 311 complaints almost exclusively. Identify them. Do they meet this definition or the pre-existing one that we've been working under? And when they do, then you come back and make that next check with what we had in here with previously the timelines. So in that regard, there is a bit of a time function to be dealt with in here. And to that point, if somebody is working on a vehicle, these officers, if you look at it, 8,000, there's 4 impounding officers, 8,000 a year. Figure that they're working 5 days a week, and just say 50 weeks a year. It's 250 days. It's a lot of vehicles. It's about 8 or 10 a day. So the fact that they may not get back to that car immediately within that 48 hours, that's possible as well. So there are, I mean, for lack of better terms, like I said, there's discretion to be had in here a little bit and some consideration through communications.
Okay. But just to be clear, so is the parking infraction the towing? Are those the same thing? Towing the vehicle away after the time frame after the time period has expired?
Technically, yes, it is. They go ahead and they'll after the time has expired, yes, ticket's written and the vehicle is towed. Okay.
All right. So just so that for the listening audience, they might hear a parking infraction and just think it's a ticket, when in actuality, your vehicle will be towed. So for clarification, if your vehicle's in the right of way, public right of way, or an easement, you have 48 hours to move the vehicle 75 feet. If it's on private property, it needs to be moved or removed within 72 hours. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. And also I should mention, you know, the vehicle's noticed. So there is a notice placed on the vehicle. It's highly visible, you know, so folks have that, you know, this isn't, we're going to go mark a tire in the corner, come back 48 hours later. It's highly visible. So the resident knows that the police will be coming back. And certainly, as Commander Baden said, most certainly people will have an addition of 48 hours. Not to say that there isn't one that was 48 hours, but typically there's a little more time frame just based on the volume. And I think when we look at the stats, I think some people may look and say, wow, a lot of complaints, kind of a lot of tickets, not a lot of tows. And some people may say, well, what exactly are they doing? That's actually good. That means that you know, people are either, the officers have discretion in not towing the vehicle, but issuing the infraction because there's some mitigating circumstance, or folks are moving their cars. And that's, I mean, ideally, we're not towing cars. We don't like to seize vehicles, seize property, but so again, I think these code changes will create some more efficiencies and more clarity for everyone.
Thank you, Robert, for also letting us know that a notice is placed on the vehicles as well. That definitely helps. All right, thank you. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the remainder of the code changes are all pretty simple to understand. They're really about clarification in the code and providing some consistency. So 2150.03b, the parking ticket service and liability. The way the existing code is written, it doesn't give the officer direction if the operator of the vehicle is standing there when they issue the citation. So what are they supposed to do? So we're just trying to clarify that and give the officer some direction to say, hey, if I'm standing there and they're writing me a parking infraction, if they ask me my name to put it on the ticket, obviously I have the ability to provide my name or to refuse. It at least gives that officer an answer to say, okay, they refused, so I'm just going to write owner on the parking ticket. So just some clarification so that the officer knows what to do. 2150.05 answers and procedures. You know, obviously people will become far more comfortable with email. So this just gives the ability for residents to email their parking ticket appeals and gives us the ability to respond through email as well. So right now we have to respond. You send me an email about a parking ticket. We approve it, or we approve the appeal, whatever. We have to send you back a letter through the mail, when we could just send email correspondence that gets to you directly the same day. So it just makes the process a little bit quicker if you're comfortable with us emailing you back the disposition on a parking ticket appeal. 2150.06, failure to answer and procedures. This just no longer requires us to use first-class mail when you're sending a parking infraction notification. It creates consistency with how we send other notices and just mirrors what we do in 2150 or 2150.05. 2150.08, non-liability of owner. This is just replacing the term answer with owner. It seems kind of weird when you read the code and it's talking about the person who answers when it's really the owner of the vehicle who received the infraction. So just clarifying that language. 215118, parking in a permit area. We added language to include virtual parking permits. This wasn't required by any stretch, but it's more of that clarification. You know, Councilmember Favors, as you're aware, we implemented permit parking in 2019 in the short north and have continued to move that forward and try to get more and more of our permit holders on a virtual platform. So just adding that language in there so for clarification purposes. And then one of the challenges we have in permit parking areas is commercial vehicles. You know, obviously it's hard enough to live in permit parking as a resident, knowing that guests have to have a permit and maybe I'm remodeling my home, so I've got a lot of contractors coming in and out. So a lot of those contractors have commercial plates on their vehicles, which if they are providing a service, it does not require a permit. So it makes it super easy for those contractors who have a commercial vehicle. But what about those who don't, or the dog walker, the housekeeper, the nurse that comes in? So what we did is we kind of expanded that definition and allowed those vehicles to come in without a permit so that those residents can continue to live and not have to worry about guest permits. But we just ask that they have a clearly logoed vehicle if they're providing a service. Obviously, you know, we may see a pickup truck that's got some supplies and tools in the back, but we don't know if that's the person who lives there, if that's their vehicle that doesn't have a permit, or if it's somebody providing a service to them. So what we've done is just said it's got to be a clearly logoed vehicle in order to not have to have a permit to be parked in the permit area. 215505, deposit funds required for meter non-payment. This is just removing a reference to mobile payment zone applications. It's actually already in the definition, so we don't need the language in there, but also just adding language regarding posted payment required. Anytime we have like a mobile payment only area, it says on the sign, the restriction sign on the street will say payment required. So we have a lot of 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. payment required. It means you got to pay the mobile app to actually pay for your parking. So once again, just clarifying some language in the code. 215505, fees for parking meter out of service. This is really just a little bit of cleanup in the language, but currently in the code it says that any lost parking meter revenue that's generated when a contractor takes parking meters out of service for a project, it goes into the general fund when it should actually be going into the parking meter program fund. So it's just updating that language to get that money out of the general fund and into the lost meter revenue fund. 215506, illegal parking. We're actually repealing this code section. What we find is, A, we don't write a whole lot of tickets with this, and it kind of mirrors what's in the meter non-payment violation, but it's just a little more vague and can sometimes become a catch-all when maybe an officer doesn't know what to write. They know the vehicle's not parked legally, but they can't really figure out what infraction it should be. So we're just going to repeal that section, and it forces our enforcement officers to be far more specific about what they're writing that infraction for. Just some language cleanup for 215507 and 211508. When we did our code changes in 2018, we removed the word coin from a lot of our codes as it relates to meter payment and replaced it with funds because of mobile payment and credit cards. So just these were two sections that we missed. So we're just updating those code sections. And then the last update, we're doing 210515 business loading zones. We no longer conduct a traffic study when we implement a loading zone. It's more about demand, parking demand on that street. What's the demand for the loading zone? Does it benefit one business, multiple businesses? So just removing that requirement for a traffic study in that code section. So that wraps up all the code changes that we have. Robert, I don't know if you have any final comments before we turn it over for questions.
No, thank you, Amanda.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all very much for your presentation and comments and answers this evening. Just a few questions. I kind of touched on this a little bit ago, but if I have been given permission to have a junk vehicle on my property, why can the vehicle not remain on my property for more than 72 continuous hours? Or can it? If you've been given permission.
give us a second. I just want to make sure I'm section. So we are adding language. This prohibition is effect. This is 2151.23. Prohibition against leaving junk motor vehicles on private property. This prohibition is effective even if the person with the right to possession of the property has given consent, or if the person leaving such vehicle owns, leases, or otherwise lawfully possesses the property upon which the vehicle is parked. So, yes, council member, as we're proposing it, regardless of permission, if it's not moved after 72 hours, with or without permission, it can be ticketed and impounded. We're proposing this because, again, as we hear feedback from the public and as we see these violations or these potential violations occurring, whether someone is okay with it or not, it's still creating safety challenges. It's still creating quality of life and property value challenges. And I think that's what we hear in our 311 complaints, in particular, those 8,000 plus a year. That's the crux of it. We're trying to clean up our neighborhood. We're trying to, we're all trying to do the right thing. And then someone is maybe not operating a dealership, but it kind of is. There's those challenges in neighborhoods where whether it's okay or not with the property owner, it starts affecting others. And that's why we wanted to close that loophole to a degree so that that effect is not being had on adjacent property owners or just generally on the neighborhood street.
So what would be the advice to someone who would find themselves in this position? So they've received permission, they're beyond the 72-hour mark, they're not going to be able to get the car up to par. Do they reach out via email to whoever has reached out to them or who has extended the permission? How should a resident navigate that?
I would have to think about that. I don't know if Amanda or Commander Bannon has any initial comments. I know I would want to talk to our code division as well, since they're the ones that primarily enforce that code section.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, my first thought would be that's a conversation with the code enforcement officer that goes out there. And as Commander Bannon had said earlier, it's really about discretion from that code enforcement officer, understanding the situation that's going on. As Robert said, though, it does become somewhat of a nuisance and a safety issue for the neighbors. I think what I've heard most often is what it does to their property values when they see these junk motor vehicles sitting on a neighboring property. So, I think it's important that a homeowner, when that code enforcement officer comes out, is to have that conversation. What are my options? Can I have a little more time? So I think it's just a conversation and discretion.
Who is extending permission? Is it the code enforcement officer or is it someone from parking services?
On private property, it would be the code enforcement officer, since they are the one actually enforcing that code section.
Okay. So we'll definitely need to check in with the Department of Development and to ensure that we're all on the same page as it relates to this matter. Once again, it's something that has, revealed itself over the past few weeks since we've lifted the 72-hour rule for towing. Next question: if I deliver for Uber Eats or DoorDash, am I considered a delivery vehicle under section 2151.18, parking in parking permit areas?
Yes, they are providing a service. So they need to be clearly logoed to not require a permit in a permit parking area. What we often find is those folks are in and out so quick that, typically we don't really have issues with them. All that we ask is they try to get out of the lane of travel and not stop in the middle of the road to make their delivery, because then that becomes a safety issue and there's more likely to be concerns with that. But based on what our enforcement officers have shared, I don't think delivery those Uber Eats and those quick service deliveries like that have been an issue because they literally pull up, drop food, back in the car, and go. So in that situation, just keep moving as quickly as possible. Or clearly logo your vehicle to be on the safe side.
So in that vein, because Uber Eats and DoorDash and other food service companies you're using your vehicle. So it's not going to be labeled like a, traditional delivery van. What is the best practice there to just tack like I'm a DoorDash delivery? I don't know what the answer is there.
Obviously, if they need to be there for more than just a quick run to the door, drop and go, they can pay to park on the street. In the Short North, there is paid parking. So clearly they could get in the Park Mobile app or the Park Columbus app and pay for a few minutes of parking if they needed to wait or something like that. So they have that option, but if it's not a clearly logoed vehicle and there's no payment, they could risk a parking infraction in the permit area. But that's where I go back to, fortunately, those vehicles are not hanging out. They're not typically waiting on anybody. They drop their food and go. So it becomes more of an issue when they're parking on High Street, when they're picking up at a restaurant. That becomes more problematic, but they're parking at meters, and permits are not good at meters anyway. And everybody who parks at a meter has to pay for a meter. So that's not free parking for anyone, unless it's after the hours of 10 p.m., between 10 and 8 a.m.
And just to follow up on that, what we found in the Short North is some creativity on the part of those vendors in purchasing magnetized logos they can put on the side of the vehicle. We've seen that from like property management companies those individuals are providing janitorial costs and just general maintenance and custodial services, and they're driving their own personal vehicle. And they have purchased, fairly inexpensive magnetized logos to slap on the side of the car so that our officer is not having to look for like a 3x5 note card that says, I'm servicing this building. Our officers have a lot of discretion in this. We have had situations where that vendor is not servicing the adjacent property. They're actually working at the restaurant down the street, but they have the logoed vehicle, and our officers recognize that. And it may happen a couple times, and then they may end up getting a ticket. So that fraud's really small. It's more to make sure we're not issuing errant tickets. And our officers need some direction in terms of, especially as you say, Councilmember, so many people are driving their own personal vehicles for things, but they are operating essentially as commercial drivers, making sure there's some kind of easily identifiable marker for our officers.
And Commander, I want to make sure I give you an opportunity to hop in if you wanted to respond to that as well.
Thank you. I think what Amanda Ford mentioned previously, as well as Robert Farron, is simply that when that person comes up to deliver, generally on that drop-off, it is so quick, and they're in there and on their way, and there is a reasonableness that is displayed by our parking enforcement personnel and officers that the car's there, they drop it off, and they leave. It's the same that we would look at with a UPS truck, an armored car service, FedEx, any of these other vehicles doing legitimate business activities quickly there, taking care of their business and leaving.
Thank you. The fine for junk vehicles on public property dropped drastically, more than 50% less than it was before. Can you explain why?
So we wanted to create some consistency in making sure that the fine violation reflected the infraction. And because our abandoned vehicle 72-hour rule infraction was $30, we felt like it was appropriate. It's similar infraction. I mean, for us in parking management, it's about access to the curb and access to parking. So whether it's junk or not, it's still sitting too long. And also there's just an equity component there. And because these vehicles are more likely to be towed and impounded, there's a fee there. And we didn't really want to add insult to injury. So by reducing it to $30, hopefully it's a little more equitable.
The legislation deletes the definition for abandoned junk motor vehicles and consolidates to one definition of junk motor vehicles. So is there no regulation of abandoned junk vehicles anymore? If they are still regulated, when is a vehicle considered abandoned?
So what we did there was we in the previous definition we put a time frame, and we wanted to take the time frame out, and we wanted to put in the actual infraction. So the definition of junk vehicle, we're actually not writing a ticket on that code. We're writing a ticket on the length of stay of a vehicle that is defined as junk vehicle. So that was some general consistency there. And now we reference the definition. And then, of course, as mentioned, we have different time frames depending on where that vehicle is located, whether it's on a public street, easement, right of way, or if it's on private property.
What about junkyards? We're talking about cleaning up neighborhoods and making sure things are looking good. Does this legislation apply to junkyards, or do they fall under another provision under our code?
I'll take a first stab at that. We will check with code enforcement, but my initial feeling, we'll check the state attorney's office as well, but my initial feeling is that's a different zoning classification, and therefore this type of violation would not apply to that zoning classification. But we will certainly double check.
Commander, I think you were shaking your head.
I was shaking my head that was my same thought. It's a different zoning. It's a licensed business, and that is their business of dealing with junk vehicles and disposing of them, salvage. So that was my thought on that as well, although that's not a legal opinion.
I think it requires a certain level of business permitting as well to be able to operate in that capacity, if my memory serves correct. I believe that's all the questions that I have. Thank you all very much. We will now move into the public testimony portion of the hearing. We have one speaker signed up to provide live testimony tonight, and my office received one piece of written testimony that has been shared with the Department of Public Service and will also be kept for the record. I will ask that our speaker state their name and any organization they represent, and you have 3 minutes to speak before you hear a buzzer. Do we have Melissa Smitherman with us this evening? I apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
Councilmember, we do not have Melissa Smitherman listed.
All right.
Attendees, I apologize.
Thank you so much, Ms. Angie. Before I go on to closing remarks, let me please provide an opportunity to any of our distinguished guests to make any final closing statements. Commander, okay, Robert, good.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. We have a couple follow-ups for your office, and we will also be following your office on when this will be presented at first reading at City Council.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Assistant Director Robert Farron, Amanda Ford with the Division of Parking Services, as well as Commander Alex Benin for being here with us this evening. These are important changes to our city's parking code that will assist our officers in being able to remove some of the junk vehicles that have long dwelled in our neighborhoods. The hope is to ultimately eliminate these examples of blight and also keep our streets and public right-of-way safer and cleaner for our residents. If you would like to offer further thoughts on these concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to my office. You can contact my legislative aide, Tynesha Harden, at tyharden@columbus.gov, or Anissa Liban at aaliban@columbus.gov. I'd like to thank both of them for helping to facilitate tonight's public hearing, and also thank our team at CTV, as well as Ms. Angela Burks for their assistance in hosting this virtual hearing. That concludes our tonight's hearing. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you very much.